Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial on research questions. My name is Dr. Melanie Maggart and today I want to provide an overview of how to create quantitative research questions, which should be useful in the courses that I teach in both quantitative research methods in advanced statistics. It can also be useful in trying to guide one's master's thesis or dissertation. Now, to provide an overview of what I'll cover in this tutorial, first we'll talk about the purpose of research questions, and then we'll talk about the types of research questions, what qualities make up a good research question, and then how to actually create a good research question, how to go about writing it, and I'll provide some examples of the different components based on the type of research question you have. So what is the purpose of research questions? Well, first and foremost, they guide us. They help focus our research and help us figure out what we want to do with our particular research study. They provide the backbone for our research study, so at any point, if we feel like we're going off track or if we need to ground ourselves again in terms of what we're studying, we can go back to that original research question. Everything really that we do within a research study should fall back on that particular question. So it's a good way to check and make sure that our methods align with what our research question is, our hypotheses align with our research question, and also the statistical tests that we're doing will provide us with the data or the results that we need to answer those research questions. Now, the way that we usually come up with research questions may vary. For some individuals who are practitioners in their field, they may choose to create research questions based on what they've seen within their profession. Other individuals may just have a particular interest in an area based on their personal life or things that they've encountered. So that could be one thing that could drive a particular research question someone might have. Another way, or what I should say is the most common way that we come up with research questions for both master's theses and for dissertations is for us to review the literature that has already been done on a particular topic of interest and find out where there might be any gaps. So are there certain populations that have not been studied in relation to certain topics? Are there different combinations of variables that have not been looked at? So those are different ways, or those are some of the ways that we could come up with potential research questions in an area that we are interested in. And then another popular way for us to look for research questions is to be based on theory. So again, we might have a particular theory that we're interested in, whether that be a new theory or one that has been around for quite some time and been thoroughly researched. What we might want to do is test that theory with a new population or sample, or to make sure that it is generalizable to various groups. So that could be another way that we can create our research question. The types of research questions I'll focus on in this tutorial are those that lend themselves more readily to a quantitative research study. Those being descriptive research questions, relationship research questions, comparative research questions, and lastly, causality research questions. So what I'd like to do is go over each one of these individually and kind of describe what are the basic components of them and provide some examples of those that fit within each of these different categories. The first type of research question we'll cover are descriptive. These are the least common in terms of those that we might use for a thesis or a dissertation, but they still could be useful for research projects or for just starting to think about a particular topic of interest. These types of research questions usually start with what is or what are, how many of something is in the population, how often does something occur, how much of something there is, or how frequently something occurs. Some examples could include what is emotional intelligence in children. You can see here that what we're looking at is to describe what is emotional intelligence. And this could be either a qualitative or a quantitative research study, depending upon how you decide to measure that or how you decide to figure out what is emotional intelligence. How many full-time government employees are satisfied with their work? You can see that this is probably going to be a fairly straightforward question to answer. You could conduct surveys and determine how many of those individuals that you've sampled are satisfied with their work. So you can see that these are somewhat simplistic in terms of the quantitative aspect of it, which is one of the reasons why they aren't typically thesis or dissertation questions. How often do households with 2 or more children under the age of 10 dine out? How much water should a person who runs an hour each morning drink per day? And then also, how frequently do college students ask their instructors for help? Something, of course, that some of us instructors out there might be interested to know, since it doesn't occur as frequently as we would like. But these are examples, as you can see, that are looking at trying to describe something, just like Descriptive statistics, which you may not know about yet if you're taking a statistics course, tell us a little bit about our data or describes what our data looks like. Descriptive research questions are looking to do the same thing. These might be research questions we might ask and use descriptive statistics to answer, because they would give us an overview of a particular sample of interest. So that's the basics behind descriptive research questions. The next type of research question we'll cover are relationship questions. And the focus of these tend to be on whether or not there is an association between variables. This could be just two, or it could be multiple, depending upon how complex your study is going to be. But the questions themselves usually start with, what is the relationship between? And then you would list, of course, the variables of interest and the sample that you were looking at. These typically lend themselves more easily to correlational studies, where you're looking to correlate two particular variables together, or multiple, and also quasi-experiments, when you might have a particular independent variable that's what we call a subject characteristic or a demographic characteristic. For example, sex, race, age, things that we cannot change about a subject or participant in our study. So we cannot manipulate or control that particular variable. So we can't necessarily say that sex causes someone to act a certain way, or their race causes them to be a certain way. But what we could do is maybe look at a relationship between certain variables using those demographics. So for example, we might want to look at what is the relationship between sex and calorie consumption in professional athletes. We may feel that maybe male professional athletes consume many more calories than female athletes. What is the relationship between age and income in high school teachers? Maybe as age increases, so does income, or maybe vice versa. Maybe income decreases over time based on the number of classes they teach. So you can see here that we're focusing primarily on two particular variables, and we want to know whether or not the second variable increases or decreases based on what happens with that first variable. So using the next one, what is the relationship between race and political party in California registered voters? Is there some type of relationship there or a pattern in this particular case, because we're looking at variables that aren't necessarily numerical here. So what is the relationship between the different categories of race and whether or not they're distributed differently based on the political party that they're in? What is the relationship between emotional intelligence and leadership effectiveness in CEOs? We might have a belief that as emotional intelligence increases, so does leadership effectiveness. What is the relationship of study time, IQ, and hours of sleep on test scores in university freshman students? In this example, we actually have four variables, three of them being independent, or those that we want to use to predict. We want to know whether or not study time, so probably as study time increases, IQ, whether or not it increases, and hours of sleep, of course, probably increasing as well, and that effect on test scores, which we would expect to increase if all of those other variables increase as well. So again, we are focusing on an association between variables, whether that just be two variables or multiple variables. The third type of research question we'll cover are comparative research questions. And these focus on a difference between groups. So the questions typically start off as, what is the difference between or in a particular variable between two groups? So we can see that this lends itself very easily to experiments in which we might manipulate or control two or more groups. So in this particular case, we might have a control group and then a group that we actually provide some type of treatment, training, or some other level of our independent variable to, and we want to compare those two groups and see how they differ. Did that treatment actually make a difference between the two groups? We typically use comparative research questions when we only have two groups we are comparing versus multiple groups. We'll get to a type of research question that focuses on multiple here in a minute. So, for example, we might have what is the difference in IQ scores of public and private high school students? So, in this case, we are looking at the difference between two groups, and those two groups are the public and the private high school students. And what we're measuring are IQ scores and seeing how they differ between those two groups. And the second example, what is the difference between a high protein and a high carbohydrate diet in building muscle mass in professional bodybuilders? So again, we have two groups here that we want to compare, and those are the high protein and the high carbohydrate diet groups. And we want to compare them based on their muscle mass and whether or not they differ based on the type of diet they were actually exposed to. In the third example, we have what is the difference in team productivity of transformational and authoritarian team leaders. So here we have two different types of team leaders that we want to compare in terms of how productive their teams were. So we have transformational being one group that we're using, and the authoritarian being the second group that we're using. And the last one I have here is what is the difference between drug A and drug B in reducing memory loss in Alzheimer's patients? So again, we have two groups we're comparing, and those are drug A versus drug B. And we want to know whether or not we can see differences in memory loss. So we are comparing those two groups, drug A and drug B. So again, comparative is all about looking at a difference between groups, typically focusing on two, and usually start with this, what is the difference in or between? The last type of research question we'll focus on in this tutorial are causality research questions. And these are looking at an effect of one variable on the other variable. So we have a cause and effect that we're looking at. Or we may be looking at how does one level of the independent variable, one group, differ from the other groups or the other levels. So this might be an example where we would have more than two levels in comparison to the comparative research questions we were looking at previously. These usually start with what is the effect of, and then we would have a cause and an effect listed. How do blank differ from blank? So we're listing, of course, how do the different groups differ based on a particular category. And is blank better than blank at something? Okay, so you can see that we're looking at cause and effect relationships here, things that we could actually manipulate and control and determine whether or not those actually impact something. These are typically found within experiments, again, because we can control what's occurring, and we could say that we control for other variables that could be related to that particular cause and effect relationship. An example of a causality research question is, what is the effect of alcohol consumption on decision making? And you can see that after alcohol consumption, I've listed the different levels or groups that are going to be compared. So we have 0 milliliters, 100 milliliters, and 200 milliliters. Those are those three different groups or levels of our independent variable of alcohol consumption that we're testing to determine their impact on decision making. So the cause here would be the alcohol consumption, and the effect would be decision making. So we could list alcohol consumption here as being the cause, and then decision making being the effect. And excuse my poor handwriting. The second example is, how do girls who read beauty magazines differ from girls who do not read beauty magazines in self-esteem scores? So here we've listed out the two different groups. We have girls who read beauty magazines versus those who do not. And then we are comparing them based on self-esteem scores. So what we might have an idea of here is that maybe we bring girls in to a research setting. We provide them with beauty magazines, one group, and then the other group we provide them with some other type of magazines or no reading material. And we allow them to read for a certain amount of time, and then afterwards we measure their self-esteem score. We could have also have measured it before too to see change over time. But what we're looking for here is to see whether or not the reading of a particular type of magazine, beauty or not beauty, impacts self-esteem scores. So the presence of beauty magazines, whether they are exposed to them or not, is the cause. And the effect here are the self-esteem scores. In the next example, we have, is repetition better than mnemonics for recalling information in older adults? So here it seems we have two different means of trying to recall information. So memory techniques, for example. So we have repetition versus mnemonics. So those are the two groups we are comparing. So maybe we expose people to either one or the other and see whether or not they're better at recalling information depending upon which one they are exposed to. So the memory strategy that we use, whether it be repetition or mnemonics, is the cause. And then the recall of information or their memory would be the effect. The next one, what is the effect of classroom environment, whether that be face-to-face, online, or a hybrid, meaning both of them, on statistics test scores? So here the question's worded similarly to the very first one, where we have the cause listed first, which is classroom environment, and the effect, which is statistics test scores, listed second. And we have three groups that we want to compare within this particular example. So classroom environment would be the cause. I apologize, it looks like I struck through them instead of underlining them. And then statistics test scores would be the effect. So on the next one, we have how do those offered a bonus for completing a work project differ from those who are offered recognition and job satisfaction scores? So the cause here is whether or not they're provided a bonus versus recognition. So what types of incentive or rewards are they offered, and what impact do those have on job satisfaction scores? So let's see, I'm going to circle this entire thing, but the independent variable will be probably their reward system, or whatever you want to refer to it as, with those two different levels. And then job satisfaction scores would be the effect. And the last one we have is, what is the effect of diet, whether it be paleo, plant-based, or the food guide pyramid, on weight loss in overweight females? So here we have diet as our cause. We have the three different groups that we want to compare: paleo, plant-based, or the food guide pyramid. We want to look at what impact that the particular diet people are exposed to has on their weight loss. So weight loss would be the effect. Okay. So again, all we have here with these causality examples is a cause and effect relationship that we want to look at. We want to know whether or not there is an impact of one variable on another variable. We could also look at an impact of multiple variables on another variable to make these more complex. So for example, let's say with the last one, what is the effect of diet on weight loss in overweight females? Maybe we also want to look at the combination of diet and exercise. So maybe we have 2 or 3 different exercise programs we want to test, and we will combine that with the different diets as well. And so those would be the two causes we are looking at. And then we want to know when they're combined together, that interaction effect they might have on weight loss itself. It may be that it's not just diet or just exercise. It may be some unique combination of those particular variables, and that's when they have an impact on weight loss. So what are the qualities of a good research question? First and foremost, it probably needs to be interesting. So that means that it needs to be useful. It needs to be in an area in which this is a question that needs to be answered, or it would be useful to have it answered. And also it should be interesting or useful to you as the researcher, especially if this is a thesis or dissertation in which you're going to be spending quite a bit of time, and you might actually expand on it later on in your profession or when you further your education. It should be something that you are truly interested in, and you believe that others would be interested in knowing the results of your research study itself. Another thing about research questions is that they need to be focused and clear. Try to make them as simple as possible when you are writing a research question. Don't try to include everything in there, just include the basics, and we'll talk about what those basic pieces are here in a few minutes. That way, when someone reads your research question, it will be very easy for them to tell what exactly you are wanting to find out. What are you looking at with your particular research study? There's no need to be wordy with these research questions. They should be straight and to the point, because they also guide your research too. And you need to be able to fall back on these and know exactly where you started and what you wanted to answer. The specifics of a good research question include what are the variables you will be looking at, so those need to be identified in those research questions. What is the relationship that you are looking for? Are you looking for a cause and effect? Are you looking for a relationship itself? Are you looking at there to be a comparison between different groups? So when I say relationship here, I don't mean that it has to be just a relationship between variables, but what exactly are you looking at to be happening with those variables? And then lastly, you need to include what the population is. Who are you going to be studying, or what are you going to be studying those variables in? So to create a good research question, you probably would first start off with a list of topics that you're interested in. Typically, we want students to go through the literature on topics of interest and narrow it down based on what gaps we feel that are in the literature itself. For my classes where we just focus on the actual creation of a research question for the purpose of looking at statistics, just create a list of topics that you're interested in. What are some different areas of interest to you? If you are, let's say, majoring in sports and wellness, why not focus on something specific to that field that you were interested in, whether that be diet or exercise regimens. If you were interested in leadership, what are some different topics in leadership that you were interested in? Whether that be the type of leadership, maybe the type of intelligence or creativity, job satisfaction, things like that. List some topics that you're interested in that can help you figure out where do you want to go with those particular topics or variables. Next, it would probably be useful to choose the type of question you want to focus on. So this might be dependent upon whether or not your research advisor leads you down a certain path and tells you that there's a certain type of research question or that they want you to answer. Descriptives are usually the least common in quantitative research methods at a higher level because they tend to be somewhat easy to answer. And you need to make sure that your question is going to take some time to answer. It shouldn't be that you can answer it within a week. But it also shouldn't be so daunting that you can't complete it within, say, 9 months to a year, depending upon how long you have to finish your dissertation. So pick the type of question that you want to look at. Do you want to look at a relationship between particular variables? Do you want to do a comparative of different groups? Or do you want to look at an actual cause and effect and think that you might actually be able to manipulate some environment to determine that cause and effect? So the next part is beginning the question that you are going to have based on the type of question that you want. So if you have a descriptive question that you want to answer, then you need to start off with that how many, how often, so on and so forth. If you have a relationship, you'll start off with a what is the relationship in or between, and so on with the comparative and the causality. Next, you need to identify the variables. So what are the independent and dependent variables? Now, an independent variable are those variables that we are controlling or manipulating, or they could be demographic characteristics, such as sex, age, and race, that we want to know whether or not there's a relationship between those and particular variable. And when you list your independent variables, if they have different levels or groups that you're specifically looking at, then be sure to mention those as well. For example, when I was mentioning on one of the previous slides that I wanted to look at the effects of alcohol consumption on decision making, the different groups were listed out in terms of, I think it was 0 milliliters, 100 milliliters, and 200 milliliters. So it's important to list those different levels because it gives your reader and yourself a guide as to what exactly you were looking for. So maybe there's something in the literature that you've read or something about the quantities making a big difference when you move from, let's say, 100 milliliters to 200 milliliters, for example. So it's important to list the different levels or groups if there are specific ones that you are manipulating or controlling within your study. And the dependent variable would be, of course, what you are measuring as the effect. So the independent variable, or what I have listed here as the IV, is the cause in those causality types of questions. And the DV is the effect. It's what you are measuring to determine whether or not the independent variable had an effect on that variable. It's what you're measuring in the end. And then the last thing that needs to be included in a good research question is to identify the groups or the population that you are interested in. Are you looking at female adolescents? Are you looking at government full-time workers? What are who's the specific group that you are looking at? We can't leave this generalized to the entire population. We need to make sure that we narrow down who exactly we are interested in answering this research question for. So I'll provide some examples of how you go about creating these different research questions. So the first one I'm going to do is creating a descriptive research question. So here I've listed a couple topics that I'm interested in. For example, intelligence, achievement, leadership, and job satisfaction. So I'm going to use that to create a descriptive research question. So I know that I can start off these types of questions with what is, what are, how much, so on and so forth. I've decided to look at a more broad question as to what is something, okay? And I've identified the variables that I'm going to use, and I'm going to focus on mainly a dependent variable. Descriptive research questions typically only have dependent variables because you're measuring things. You're not manipulating or controlling anything, typically. So in this case, I want to look at the average IQ. And who do I want to look at it for but the leaders of Fortune 500 companies. So I've identified here the type of question I want to do, which is descriptive. I began my question with what is. I've identified that I want to look at what is the average IQ, and I want to look at the average IQ for leaders of Fortune 500 companies. So I've color-coded it here so you can see where I've taken those different pieces or elements and included them in the research question at the bottom. So you can see the beginning of the question, what the actual dependent variable is in blue, the average IQ, and then the group or population of interest at the end, leaders of Fortune 500 companies. So this is how you would go about possibly creating a descriptive research question. The next example I have is on how to create a relationship research question. So I've left the list of topics the same, and I've decided this time that I want to look at a relationship between two of those particular variables or topics. So I'm going to start my question with what is the relationship, and I'm primarily interested, let's say in this case, looking at whether or not there's a relationship between intelligence or IQ scores and job satisfaction. And I want to look at that again in leaders of Fortune 500 companies. So when we look at relationship questions, the independent variable, or what we might often refer to as the cause and causality questions, is typically referred to as the predictor. It's what we think might impact or have an effect on the outcome, which in this case would be, let's say, the dependent variable of job satisfaction. So maybe we think those individuals who have higher intelligence as a CEO maybe are more satisfied with their job in such a prestigious position. So you can see down here at the very bottom, again, I have it color-coded so you can see that I began the question with what is the relationship between, and then I have intelligence, which is my predictor, and job satisfaction, which is the outcome, in leaders of Fortune 500 companies, which is the population I am interested in. We have all of those elements in there. So if anyone read that question, they would easily be able to understand that I'm looking at a relationship and what my two variables are and who I want to do this study with. So there's a lot of information in that short sentence. So again, it shows you how you can be very focused, very clear, but have a lot of information within your research question. Next, we'll look at an example on how to create a comparative research question. So if we remember back to comparative, that is when we want to look at two groups typically and see what the difference is between those two groups. So I know that I want to do a comparative question, and those typically start with what is the difference? Okay, well, what do I want to know the difference in? Why don't I look at different types of leadership styles? So maybe I want to compare those who are more democratic in their leadership versus those who are more autocratic, authoritarian. And I want to look at see whether or not those individuals who are more democratic or autocratic maybe have higher job satisfaction scores as a leader. So the leaders themselves, we're going to measure their job satisfaction. Okay. And again, we want to look at leaders of Fortune 500 companies. So we're looking at the same sample or group. And what we've decided to do now is look at the difference. So what is the difference in job satisfaction? So we've listed the DV here, or the effect, but that's another way you can word it, between democratic and autocratic. So those are the two leadership styles of our independent variable. And again, leaders of Fortune 500 companies. So we've got all of the information here to tell the reader that we're doing a comparative study looking at the difference between democratic and autocratic leaders in Fortune 500 companies and how satisfied they are with their job. What are their job satisfaction levels? So hopefully this is useful because you're seeing how you can take just a general list of topics that you might be interested in and create different research questions based on what you want to focus on and what type of question that you want to have. So the last one we'll cover is how to create a causality research question. So we know causality has to do with cause and effect. So we're going to have an independent variable that we think is going to impact our dependent variable. So in this case, maybe we want to see whether or not if a particular leader has a leadership style, it is going to impact the team members of those particular leaders in terms of their job satisfaction. So you can see that this is different than the previous question, in that the previous question, those leaders already had their job satisfaction most likely, and their leadership style as well. So it's not like we probably manipulated the environment. We didn't tell a leader that they had to have a particular leadership style in order to control that variable. So we're looking at something that's already, in a way, naturally occurring in the workplace. So it's a somewhat quasi-experimental study. In this case, what we might want to do, and though we are not assigning people to leadership styles, but maybe we assign team members to particular leaders. And we want to know whether or not, if you're a member of a team that is democratic, maybe you have a higher job satisfaction rate than someone who is a member of a team that is autocratic. So we're going to take different leaders that have those particular styles, take team members, randomly assign those to those particular groups, and then measure their job satisfaction. So the independent variable calls, in this case, is the leadership style that's being used, democratic versus autocratic. And the dependent variable would be job satisfaction of the team members themselves. And then again, we're still looking at leaders of Fortune 500 companies and their leadership style. So what is the effect of leadership style, democratic versus autocratic, of leaders in Fortune 500 companies on the job satisfaction of team members? So you see this one's a little bit more lengthy than the other ones, but it still is very concise and to the point in terms of what variables we have and what type of study we actually want to conduct here. With that, I would like to thank you for watching this tutorial today. Hopefully I provided some useful tips on how to create good research questions, primarily quantitative research questions, and how to go through the process of creating those. If you have any questions or comments about this video, feel free to comment on them below or like them. And until next time, thank you.